before I start to share my slides. So in terms of some of the housekeeping today, obviously we're on Zoom. Some of you use Zoom every day. Some of you might use Teams. So just to be clear about if you're not so familiar, we use Teams now, so I always have to check where the different buttons are. With Zoom, obviously, you have your speakers on your microphone. If you can hear me, your speakers are working. All of you I can see are on mute, which is fantastic. Try and remain on mute when you're not speaking, but if you'd like to speak, obviously you can just switch that off. And there's in the bottom left of the screen, it's called audio, and you can switch that on and off. The other thing to say is that as well as the presentations, we will really like some interaction and some questions. And you can do this in a couple of different ways. If you listen to something throughout one of the presentations and would like to ask a question, feel free to use the chat function. That's the fourth button across on the bottom left. Chat, you can put a question in there, and please feel free to direct it towards a particular speaker, and hopefully they will pick that up. And I'll ask our speakers today to keep an eye on the chat throughout, because it may be that you could share a link or respond in the chat. But when our colleagues finish their presentations today, I will also ask people to raise their hands if you want to ask a question, and I will attempt to ensure that as many people as possible are able to answer questions. So I think that's all of the housekeeping, which leads me then to share my slides and do some introductions. So just bear with me while I do this. So formally then, welcome to this session. This session is about involving and listening to the public to advance social responsibility. And we have three fantastic case studies from around the world. Thank you to my colleague Mags at Manchester, but also to Ilyas at UPEC in Paris, and also to Philipp in the Vrije University in Amsterdam for coming forward and volunteering to be case studies today. We really appreciate that. We're going to have an excellent session. We've got people on the call today from pretty much all of the continents around the world, and the different perspectives you'll bring today will be really enlightening for us. So what I wanted to do is just say a little bit, first of all, about who I am, and also a little bit about the University Social Responsibility Network. So my name is Julian Skyrme, and I'm the Executive Director of Social Responsibility and Civic Engagement at the University of Manchester, which is one of the largest universities in the UK and in Europe, actually. And we've been a member of the USRN since its inception in 2015. The USRN is a global alliance to promote university social responsibility, and it tries to ensure that the social mission becomes core within universities. And USRN provides an effective platform for collaboration among member universities in lots of different areas of USR activities. So there's around 21 member institutions at the moment, with a very wide geographical spread, as you can see from the visual in front of you at the moment. But the commonality of all of those universities is each of those are committed to making a positive impact on the world and committed to the concept of university social responsibility. So that's a little bit about USRN. I'll say a little bit about the format now. After my introduction, we're going to have three case studies from around the world. So Mags from Manchester, Ilyas from Paris, and Philipp from Amsterdam. And each of those speakers will speak for around 7 minutes each. And what we'll aim to do is get through our presentations by about 9:35, and that will give us around 15 minutes for conversation. So let me just say also a little bit about the premise of this presentation, this topic that we're looking at today around involvement. And I think one of the reasons why we've chosen the topic today and to have this discussion is universities around the world, for lots of different reasons, are attempting to work with communities and not just do things to them. I think that's a really important turn you will see in universities around the world who are committed to social responsibility. You'll see this with talk not just about public engagement, but about public involvement. You'll see this in theories of participatory research and co-production in research. You'll see this in examples of universities developing community fora and citizens panels and lay panels, and universities thinking about their governance to involve people from outside of higher education in the governance of universities. Now, this, I think there's a number of reasons for this. It might sound like the fair thing to do, and there's definitely an argument that this is a fair thing to do for universities, because universities have traditionally enjoyed a great degree of privilege compared to other sectors of society. But I think what you'll see today, though, this isn't just a fairness argument, it's also one of effectiveness and one of relevance. So this is not a tokenistic thing. This is not a charitable or a performative move by universities. This is really about two things, really. For universities to be more effective, they need to turn themselves inside out. If we believe universities are there for public good, we need to involve the public in our work. We will have better research questions, better teaching. We will serve society better through listening and involving the public. So it's not a charitable venture. It's about us being relevant and effective. It's also, of course, a democratic question as well. If we believe that universities are there for the public good, where does the funding for universities ultimately come from? We have many different funding systems around the room today, but I think common to all of us is that in the vast majority of cases, most of the funding of universities around the world still comes from the public purse. Obviously, the teaching costs in countries around the world vary, and there are different systems around the world, but most universities around the world for their research will be funded from the public purse. Therefore, the public has a strong interest in universities and rightly should be asking questions about how they are run and wishing to be more involved. So there are just a little bit of background about why we thought this topic was so important today. So without further ado, I'd like to bring this to life now with 3 examples from around the world. I'm really excited about this aspect. And the first example we've got is from my own institution, and Mags Bradbury from the University of Manchester, my colleague, is going to give you a short some case studies now from the University of Manchester. So Mags, really pleased to see you this morning, and I'll hand over to you.
Morning, and thank you, Julian. I think I'm not going to go through any of the things that Julian said about kind of why we're doing this and the kind of the purpose, because we've only got a very short time, and I do want to sort of bring these things to life. The one thing I do want to say is that I'm going to talk about 3 sort of examples of how we are involving and going beyond engaging, but this real kind of involving participation within our university. But there are lots of examples. The ones I'm not going to talk about today are the ones involving staff and students. I'm very much focusing on an external audience, really, and those kind of partners, neighbours, community groups. But we do a lot of listening. So I thought it'd be helpful to sort of explain what this looks like in practice, because it is a really complex landscape. We have this sort of broad framework. We are assessed on our knowledge exchange framework and on how we deliver our SDGs, but we need some mechanisms to make this happen. So the first one I want to talk about is actually something called our General Assembly. And this is actually part of our formal governance. So each example gives you a different idea of how it fits in with the university's system and the university's kind of way of working. So the General Assembly is a really exciting kind of innovative group that come together regularly, and they're made up of civic leaders, so people from our local hospitals, made up from community leaders, made from religious leaders as well in the city. So it's a real diverse group of people. It does involve students and staff as well. And they come together for this real kind of two-way conversation so that we benefit hugely from their expertise. You know, when you've kind of got these civic leaders or kind of business leaders sat around the table having these conversations, and that's basically how it happens. So this General Assembly meet. Their topics are shared with them. So recently they were talking about Manchester 2035, our new strategy development, and they question and they offer support, and there's a conversation about how this fits in. They are the Chancellor, our Chancellor chairs the meeting, so it's seen as very important by the organisation, and our President, our Vice Chancellor, also attends and attends regularly. From these meetings, the General Assembly members are also enabled to come out and talk to different people within the university. So Julian has lots of conversations with General Assembly members about how we are delivering social responsibility, how it's impacting and working with the local hospitals and local community groups. So that's our first example. Julian, can I ask you to go on? So very quickly, those are the measures that we put in. The second example is really around our research, and particularly around our research within the health sector. And we have a very big faculty of health, and they really need, actually, this is a real need from the university, to work with patients, to understand patients' needs so we can improve. And I think this worked on several levels. It's not just about improving kind of drug production, medical care. It's also about reducing health inequalities, because in the UK, we've been shown to have significant health inequalities from different groups. So we have something called the Patient and Public Involvement and Engagement, nicely PPIE, and it's a huge programme with over 500 public contributors. All these contributors are paid, and they sit alongside our researchers, and there's a forum to kind of provide some governance and structure. But they are very well embedded within the faculty, they are very well respected, and actually now some of our public contributors train our academics or train other contributors. So we have this sort of ecosystem where we are benefiting. There's also the public contributors get involved in our service learning, so I'll work with our students as well, particularly about engaging kind of underrepresented and under-engaged groups. So that's our patient and public involvement, very much linked to research and teaching. And then my final example is the Greater Manchester Citizens Panel. And this is really quite new still. It's in its third year of operation. It was born out of the collaboration between the 5 universities in our city region. So the city region is called Greater Manchester. The 5 universities came together. They undertook originally a survey looking at what the general public, the residents of Greater Manchester, thought the universities could contribute. And it was really interesting because they were really proud of having universities, but felt we could engage much more. We also made a commitment alongside our local government not to do anything for our residents without engaging our residents. So it was this real involvement and engagement driving a very different way of having a conversation. So we have recruited a panel of 50 members of the general public, and they are there from all walks of life, from all parts of our city region. And we asked them specifically not to have a relationship originally with the university. So we recruited people that weren't our usual suspects. They weren't the people that knew us. And they have worked with us over the last 2-3 years to go through all the priorities within the Civic University Board, and for some of our researchers to help us understand how our research might land with our general residents, what their priorities are, what their concerns are, how well are we doing at talking about what we do, how well do what we think is important impact on their lives. And it's been really radical in what we've kind of learned and what our researchers have learned. Sometimes we've had to go back to the start for what our researchers have thought about the general public's view and realised that it was very different to what was actually happening on the ground. We have a ways of working charter, and once again, we pay our participants and we pay them for their lived experience. So it's that recognition and value of what these people bring. I could talk for ages about the Greater Manchester Citizens Panel, but we've got 2 other amazing speakers. So hopefully those 3 examples will give you an example of the ways and the framework that we're starting to build about how we become much more porous and connected with the people that we serve.
Thank you very much, Mags, and perfectly done in 7 minutes as well. I'm really grateful for that. There's so much in there. I mean, it's really important themes for colleagues to think about, perhaps, with some of the questions you might ask. So I think there's a real theme coming out in what Mags said about paying the people who are involved in our work. I think that's really important, but it's a challenge, of course. It's expensive. I think there's some interesting examples around patients. Lots of us are working with patients. Are you involved in them? Are there examples you'd like to share later? And also involvement in governance in its broadest sense, whether that could be your board or a general assembly or other areas, or it could be governance around particular research projects. So do think about whether there's any questions you might want to ask Mags later or any examples you would like to share. But without further ado now, I'm really delighted to introduce Ilyas Kenadid, who's the Director of Strategy and Major Projects at UPEC, which is Université Paris-Est Créteil. I probably said that really badly. Sorry, Ilyas, you can correct me now. But Ilyas, over to you, please, for your example. We're really looking forward to hearing this.
No problem. Thank you, Julian. Thank you very much. So yeah, we'll start briefly by talking a bit about the why we do what we do, and then introduce UPEC, which is a very particular university within the French system. Then I will discuss very briefly the how we do things, and then I will end and focus much more on the what we do. So just to come back briefly on the why, I think it's very important to know that there's been, and research shows that there's been a global loss of trust in universities on the part of society, especially during COVID-19. And for instance, Americans' confidence in higher education has dropped from 75%, 57% in 2015 to 36% in 2023. So you can see that the public trusts less and less higher education. Fortunately for us, this trend seems to be more limited in France. We still have 84% of the population that has confidence in science and in higher education. However, we could say everything's perfect. We don't need to engage with the public because they trust us and we can do whatever we want. That is not true. We still see in the same study that there is only a quarter of the population that believes that science brings more good than harm. So we see there that we have a responsibility to turn that trend upside down. And there's also one concerning fact in the study. It's that there is a drop in the knowledge of science that people have, and that people are less and less able to answer basic science question. So yeah, we can stay on that slide for now. So that's the why we do things we do. There is a global loss of trust from society in our universities. So UPEC is a very particular university in France. It's located in the outskirts of Paris, in the eastern part, as the name says. And it's located in a very large area. We have 6 campuses spread over 3 local authorities departments, and in very unequal areas. So we have very privileged areas such as Fontainebleau, where is located the castle, and also very deprived areas and very dense urban areas such as Créteil, where our center is located. We are one of the largest universities in France with over 42,000 students. And one interesting fact is that 40% of our students are coming from the second or third generation of immigration. So that also shows what kind of responsibility we have towards our territory and society. And also the fact that we are located both in privileged and deprived areas shows that we need to address specific topics, but in a holistic approach, because those are not the same issues that all the people that we serve have. So we have core values and, of course, focus of research, but I won't go deeply into that. We can move on to the next slide. But I think one of the main things that's important is how do we do things we do? There's no funding to do what we do related to public engagement in universities. The government funds the university in France up to 80%. And then if we want to do more than teaching and research, we have to go out and find that money to do the new things that we want to do. So we're lucky enough to be awarded in 2022 with a national call for project called Excellence, with our program called Erasme, which means Education and Research to Advance Societal Mission through Engagement. And the engagement was the keyword in that program, with a lot of money, as you can see. And the main goal is to transform our university in the next 10 years to make it much more committed to its societal mission and to the public and the territory. So we have 6 work packages that are contributing to that idea. But the one thing that I wanted to present and to focus on was the what do we do to really go from having a lot of projects within our universities involving the public. We have participatory research, we have a student citizen assembly, we have a lot of initiatives that are going on. But how do we make sure that that third, fourth, fifth mission, depending on where you come from in the world, is not limited to those few projects, but is really an institutional-wide strategy that feeds within all of our missions and activities. So that feeds within research, that feeds within teaching, student engagement, and so on. And so the what will come in the next slide. And so we were inspired by the works of Bruno Latour, who is a French sociologist, that work on an initiative called Where to Land. And I think that was the main question that we had at first. Where do we want to land with our public engagement, with our transformation of our university? And as part of the Erasmus program, which I've just introduced before, we've redesigned our whole partner and public engagement strategy to shift from what we had before, was a very top-down approach where we gathered our partners and the public within an amphitheater and showed us everything that we've done and how brilliant the university is, and then just let them go back to their institution without exchanging and really engaging with them. So that approach that we have is called the Partners Assembly, and there is 5 core principles that I will go briefly into, and I think I will focus on the key takeaways that we have with the initiative. So I think one of the main things is that we describe rather than discuss, and it's very important because within our universities, we have many communities, and outside in the public, you have many communities as well, and everybody has an opinion, and everybody wants to express that opinion, and we need to come back to a much more objective and pragmatic approach to make sure that everyone is on equal footing, and that there is no people that know and people that receive the knowledge. And so to do that, we use different mediums. We have different approaches to do that. But the main objective is to cultivate the collective and make sure that the boundaries are blurred and that there is no university or no academics, no students, and no administrative staff and the outside, but that everyone is on an equal footing. So I think the main idea is to disrupt the status quo, to make sure that it's not the university feeding within society and steering the way, but it's a much more equal approach where everyone has an equal say in how the university should operate and how we should transform our mission. So the Partners Assembly, the key takeaways that we have, what we found is that it creates meaningful and sustainable collaborations, meaning that all the projects that we had before are still going, but that it creates new projects that are much more sustainable on the long term, because it comes from both sides of the scope at the same time and in the same way. We can work on very broad issues, sustainability, student engagement, or much more focused issues. And one of the, let's say, concrete example is the redesign of our teaching offer. We've used the Partners Assembly to redesign the whole teaching offer of UPEC and to make sure that it answers the needs of our territory and society in a concrete manner. And I think that the last thing, and I will come back to that, is very important, disrupting the status quo and making sure that everybody's on equal footing and that there is no people above the other within that setting.
Thank you very much, Ilyas. And again, brilliant, all done in 7 minutes. There's so much in there, some really interesting themes. I loved the way you introduced this around trust, about the why. I think that's so important in terms of public trust around the world for experts, for big institutions, for traditional institutions. It's so important that the public trust what we do. And how this fits in also to a strategy you have at UPEC. You know, this isn't an accident while you've developed this. It comes from very deliberate and top-down strategy. And I think how things land within that, it's so important to have that broader institutional support. So a fascinating example. So do think about any questions you've got around trust or around strategy, for example, for Ilyas later. And then also, I'd like now to introduce our third and final speaker, an example today, which is Professor Philipp Pattberg, Philipp is the director of the Amsterdam Sustainability Institute at the Vrije University in Amsterdam. And over to you, Philipp, for your example, please. And it's a very specific example which will be brought to life about how discussion and involvement of the public is really supported an initiative at VU.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me clearly. It's very nice to see you all and to have you all here from the comfort of my own home office, to be able to speak to people from around the world. So sometimes I'm still fascinated by technology, the good type of technology. I also want to say that many things I heard resonate deeply with me. The discussion that the university needs to be more than a broker, an honest broker of knowledge and an ivory tower. I think we all agree, but that the university probably needs to be a change maker, much more than it has been so far. And I just want to make these very personal remarks to start out with. I'm very worried about developments that I see around myself, colleagues from the US reporting a really incredible anti-intellectual climate emerging there, undermining science and basically having denialists of science in charge, is of course a context in which we as universities cannot do business as usual, I think. Having said that, the story I want to tell and talk about is a little bit older. It still comes from a period where those things were maybe just possibilities. So a couple of years back, and you can move to the next slide. Both students and staff were concerned about the way our university, the Vrije University in Amsterdam, was engaging with the fossil fuel industry. And I know it's a very contested topic because even within our community, many people thought that we had good relations to the industry and that there were meaningful research done, meaningful projects, which would result into tangible, positive change. But there were others, both students and staff, that were feeling much more uneasy about these relationships. And if you move to the next slide, I want to explain why this was the case. There should be some, yeah, go to the next slide. My mistake. There's a next one, please. Yes. So this is in a nutshell the strategy of the VU. And if you look closely, sustainability is in various places. Sustainability is one of our core values next to being entrepreneurial and diverse, but it's also one of our key profile areas. So many staff and students felt uneasy because our university talks about being a good citizen globally, taking responsibility, contributing to the SDGs, for example, but at the same time having many potentially questionable engagements. So there was this call for more transparency. What are we doing, and how can we judge what we're doing? So that was the first step. It was an internal process. And I'm not going to go too much into that. It led to a decision of our board to not enter into new collaborations with fossil fuel industry unless they could show commitment to the Paris Agreement. And then one point I want to make right here is that it doesn't really matter what we decided in a sense. It was important that we decided something to overcome a situation in which everything goes, in which there's no clear rules. So this debate could have ended up on the other side because it was very close in a way. But our board took the decision to stop. And I think it's important sometimes to take a decision, even if that requires a lot of discussions internally. And many other universities in the Netherlands and beyond are still in the process of discussing, which I do understand, but I think it also creates a lot of problems. So the first thing we did is we had an internal debate. We gathered all the facts. We took a decision. Now, once that decision was taken, we realized that we needed an instrument to actually make this work. So we needed a policy framework to actually test whether projects would comply with this new idea. We had to operationalize basically some of our ideas. And we did that a year later. So since April 2024, we have a committee that actually looks at any new research, potentially with the fossil fuel industry, and then to validate that they are in line with the Paris Agreement or not. Now, while this was all going on, and you could go to the slide before, I hope. I messed up, I think, my order of slides, but that's fine. No, this is a slide afterwards, so sorry for that. So, yes, the next one. So we realized quickly that it is one thing to have an internal discussion, And the other is to engage the stakeholders. And that's what I want to talk about, because that's the topic of today. We got a lot of criticism, actually, when we moved ahead and took a decision, because the other universities, our colleagues, so to speak, in the Netherlands, they felt a bit uneasy. Why is it that VU can move ahead so quickly? It put them in the spotlight. What is your decision? And they had very similar internal debates, but they took a different approach. Maybe they had different thoughts. They had also different interests, right? Some universities having much more reliance on collaboration. So we felt very good about our decision, but we also felt that our peers were a bit uneasy. So we realized we need to talk, and quickly. We need to quickly have a debate. We also realized the same with stakeholders, in the sense of the industry and civil society, that were either cheering us on, saying more, better, but also were feeling very uneasy. So the industry was coming to the VU and asking, so what's next? Now it's the fossil fuel industry, maybe it's big pharma, maybe it's the chemical industry, right? Where does it stop? So we got a lot of questions from our stakeholders. So we decided to engage in dialogues. And actually we had 3 dialogues. 2 of them were not public, and 1 was a public dialogue. And I want to talk very briefly about that decision. Some people say, isn't that intransparent? Isn't that actually the problem? You do a lot of stuff behind closed doors. You should have these debates in public. And we had lots of discussions, and we decided nonetheless to have our debate with the other universities and with the industry and civil society behind closed doors. And why is that? Because we realized that if we don't do that, we will have a platform to basically just do your usual PR, where you can say what everyone already knows, that you're either doing a good job in the energy transition, I don't know what, or that you don't like the fossil fuel industry because they ruin the planet, and you will move not an inch ahead. So we said we don't want to do it like this. We want to have a meaningful, a critical, an honest debate. And so we need to make sure this can happen a bit in a safe space. So we decided to have these discussions with the other universities and with the industry and civil society behind closed doors under Chatham House rules. And I think that was a really good decision, because my experience being part of those debates was it was a very, very honest discussion where CEOs of large fossil fuel companies could come out and say that they understand us, but there's still very little they can do to overcome shareholder pressure and the like, and to really have a good discussion about why things are much more difficult and complex than they're sometimes portrayed from the different, let's say, perspectives, different sides of the aisle, so to speak. We also realized that there was a lot of things we had in common with other universities. So actually a really good example of moving ahead together. So we are important as individual players, but as universities, we realized quickly we're stronger together. And that's also one of the conclusions I draw from this experience, that as we move ahead together, then I think as universities, we can be very strong. So yeah, these debates that we did internally, and I'm almost done, were really fruitful in the sense of understanding the problems, but they did still not involve the broader public. So we did a third debate with the public in a really open format where we had a lot of involvement with the people who would read about this in the press, who would maybe have been alumni of a university, and they really were interested why we took this decision. So in these discussions, what we think we managed to do is to conclude that the role of the university is broader than just a broker of knowledge. And I want to really stress this point. Many, many, many people came to us and said, we are really happy that you as a university take responsibility and you push the system ahead. And we need that. We need universities not only to be neutral, to provide space for discussions, but sometimes on some issues also to take a decision. And why is that? Because when universities do that, they can leverage a lot of their authority, and that can help other actors to also move. So I think we were really happy with that. So because people were saying universities can and should sometimes be change makers. I also want to say very clearly that this approach has limits, because there are discussions and topics where you simply cannot agree. So you end up in a space of contestation. And I think that is something that I would like to discuss with everyone. How can we move beyond that? So we have to put our foot down on some issues. We have to be change makers. But on the other end, yes, we are part of society, and we have to listen to what society is saying. So we're put into some uneasy space sometimes, to want to move maybe quicker than some parts of society can move. So what is the good approach to do that? If you're interested in the specifics of this journey, we did a podcast on that, and that was on my last slide. So I would invite you just to listen to that. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to share our experience also in the chat. I just want to say finally that this was not something I did, but we really did together as a community. So everyone at my university was part of that. And I'm very proud because it was one of the really good experiences in my career to work with everyone on campus on something, and that empowered many people. And I think that is also something we should take into account. This is not a theoretical debate. It is about empowerment. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thanks very much, Philipp. An excellent example there, really, of a university really stepping forward, and sometimes not being in sync with society is okay as well. That concept of change maker. Sometimes universities can feel backward organizations that do things more slowly. Sometimes we feel we have values that might be ahead of some of the rest of society. And I think we're depending on the issue and the stage in history perhaps as well. And I thought it's a really good example of how you can also have the importance of sometimes having these closed debates and discussions as well. So these are not performative, they're really meaningful. I thought that was a really good example, and it raises questions around where we should be doing things in public and where perhaps we shouldn't as well on occasions. And I think that's a really interesting question. There's not an easy answer, but you may wish to ask a question about that. So I'm now going to stop sharing my slides so we can all see each other. And there's lots of comments in the chat, and one of them was around, are the slides going to be made available? They definitely will be. There'll also be a recording made available of today's session, which you can share with colleagues as well as rewatch yourselves if you like. So now I would like to throw this open to colleagues who might wish to raise their hands to ask any questions. There's lots of themes there on governance, on whether we pay people to be involved, on trust in universities, on strategy, on universities as change makers, on asking things around public versus private discussions. So there's so many rich themes. So please, over to you, participants, please, to make a comment or ask a question, please, of any of our panelists.
Can I ask the first questions, Julia?
Yes, you can. Please go.
Good.
Go for
Okay,
it.
yeah. The first questions I would like to ask the first speaker, Max. Nice seeing you again online. You mentioned about the General Assembly. I would like to know more about how often you have this General Assembly and how many people participate into this General Assembly, and what sort of outcome that you could achieve from these General Assemblies.
Sorry, just taking myself off mute. So they formally meet 3 times a year. And I say that very carefully because actually they meet a lot outside of those events. So they formally meet 3 times a year. I think the real kind of impact is there's so many follow-ups from them. So the format is there's a discussion in the meeting, there's information shared from the university, and then when the questions develop, often what happens, or certainly what happened at the last one, where people were kind of offering specific support around the development of the strategy. There was a big conversation by one of the innovation leads in the city saying, right, well, we can help you with that innovation. We also had some conversations with some of the community leaders about making sure that our strategy resonated with them, and then with Manchester City Council, who were represented, about how our strategy overlaid their strategy and complemented and worked together. So that they meet, there is a challenge and there's a discussion. The follow-up kind of collaborations, I think, for me, are the real impact and importance side of things. All of that does get reported back to our board, and there's a formal report at the board. So there is that formal connection with the very, very most senior part of our governance. Sorry, Ben, what was the second part of your question?
Oh, the second part is each General Assembly, roughly how many people attended this General Assembly?
So they've actually just done a big review of all the membership. So it's about 50. It has been bigger in the past. They've really looked at making sure the membership reflects our Greater Manchester communities. So two of the new members, one was from Citizens Advice, which in the UK is a charity which gives advice to people in debt or with financial concerns or legal issues. So some of the big challenges we're having about cost of living, there needed to be that connection and expertise. The other one that would join that was notable was someone from the Co-op Group. Manchester is the home of the Co-op Group, which is the largest consumer co-op in the UK. And the university wanted stronger kind of civic ties with that organisation, but also wanted to link around the sustainability agenda because the co-op has been very strong on its sustainability agenda. So we think that it will help with our social responsibility work and help them, the co-op as well, with research around kind of links around research. So yeah, there is a core. They host the meetings in person, but people can join online, recognizing that if you are, a busy civic leader, you might not always be able to engage. The other notable elements are things like the hospital sector. And when we were developing our health inequalities, the General Assembly members were very linked into looking at our health inequality work.
All right.
Thank you
Okay,
very much, Mags, and thanks for the question, Ben. We've got a couple of hands up, Ben. So we've got Magdalena, first of all. Magdalena, really nice to see you. Please, over to you to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you very much. Max, good to see you. Ilyas and Henk, thank you for your presentation. Super insightful, the three super different. I have a lot of things in mind. I would just like to ask you, taking into account the way you work with your stakeholders and so on, how do you see the role of professors and students, and I would say this word, service learning, using that to help your communities? Because you are in three different cities. The cities in itself are different. I mean, ones are the capital, the others, Manchester is not the capital of the UK. So how do you work with them? How do you engage teachers? I mean, we academics sometimes are, and they're in their world, and to get them to work with students and go to society, just there. It would be interesting to hear the three of you, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so thanks very much, Magdalena. Ilyas, why don't you try and answer that from a Paris perspective then, in terms of what you're doing around service learning and how the work is fed into the curriculum? Because I know that was a part of your presentation. Maybe you could expand on that, please. Thanks, Ilyas.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Magdalena, for the question. First of all, I think one important fact is that all that we've talked about this morning is not taken into account for the professors and academics' career in France. It's not something that they should work on to improve their career and go from lecturer to professor status. So we really need to put incentives for our academics to go into that into those activities. For the students, I think we have a very endogenous recruitment student. They come from our territory, so they know the struggles. They know what needs to be done to improve the lives of their relatives and their friends in that territory. So I think they feel much more responsible for improving the lives of the territory because they're from that area. So it's very natural for them to engage within those activities. For the professors, we are lucky enough to have very engaged and committed academics that take on those missions and that develop projects, research, participatory research, and also and including the students within those projects. We have one specific project that's very interesting is the Student Citizen Assembly that gathers students, many from our Political Science Institute, and also the local authorities and the local citizen, and that work on specific matters. We had food, we had water, we also had university link with society, so very meta kind of topic. So yeah, very important, but sadly still not acknowledged in the career of the academics. So needs to work on that on the national level.
Thanks very much, Ilyas. I'm keen to get as many questions as possible. So I'm going to move on to Henk now. Henk, really nice to see you from Amsterdam. You've had your hand up patiently. So over to you, Henk, for your observation or question, please.
Thank you, Julian, and thank you for moderating this. And also thanks to Miranda for making this possible. 3 very rich presentations, very inspirational in many ways, I think. I would like to pick out one particular detail, maybe a detail, but I think it's also a principal question. Max, if I understood correctly, you mentioned something about the final financial compensation to the contributors of public engagement. Ilyas said, we don't do that at UPEC. We don't have the financial means for it. Philipp didn't really touch upon it, but this may be a principal question. Max, you seem to suggest that if you give some payment to these contributors, they also feel more recognized and acknowledged, perhaps. My question is, and not particularly addressed to anybody specifically, is this something that should be considered when talking about university social responsibility? Should contributors get some kind of recognition financially or otherwise, or would that also make the initiative a little bit vulnerable, namely dependency on money?
Thanks very much for that question, Henk. I think it's a fundamental question for all of us. And rather than just put it to the panel, I'll give a proposition perhaps to others in the audience to open this up, because I think you can see there are different positions on the panel. And just to be clear, at the University of Manchester, we can't afford to pay everyone for all of the involvement either. But when we've developed more high-profile initiatives, we've tried to ensure that that principle is adhered to for things we really want to stand behind, big strategic initiatives. And the reason being, Henk, that I'm sure we've all sat in rooms before where we're all being paid to be here today, I presume. Nobody's doing this out of the goodness of their heart and as a charity to come along today. We're all being paid. And many of us will have sat in rooms where we're being paid a nice amount, actually, if you work in a university in most parts of the world, where other people from the public are coming and giving their time for free. And that reinforces a position of inequality, I think, where we would expect other organizations with less resources or individuals who may or may not have a very high income. So it's an interesting question, and it's not a black and white question. Mag's organized an excellent consultation with the public recently, and we asked people. Some people were there from Manchester City Council or from, I don't know, the company Siemens, and we knew they were being paid to be there at the university at this event. Other people, though, weren't being paid. They were self-employed, or they run small social enterprises, and this was taking a cost out. So we did it on a position of honesty, and Mags organised and oversaw this event and simply asked people, if you feel you need to be paid for being here, you're not being paid, then let us know and we will make a compensation for your time. And we did it through a voucher system, but we've worked with patients for a lot of our time at the University of Manchester, and the principle of paying people came out of our work actually with patients that we've been doing for a long time. So I'm really interested in other people's perspectives as well as the panel, because I think you can see a variety of initiatives. So Neeraj has her hand up. Was it on this particular point, Neeraj, around payment? Because I'd be really keen if other people wanted to contribute some perspectives, and maybe I'll throw it back to the panel then. So Neeraj, please.
Hello, good evening, sir.
Hello.
Good evening. Are you getting me? Sir, I am Neeraj Gupta from University, India. I want to say that it's a very good panel discussion regarding you can say, for the holistic development of all over the world, we can say. It is very good discussion. I want to say that if we discuss some problems faced by the various countries, and we may contribute to solve that problem. There may be a problem on one issue in my country, and there may be a solution in another country also. So I feel if we talk together about this also, then we can contribute more. Because in India, we go on the concept Vasudev Kutumbakam. It means the whole earth is like a family, and we all are the family members. So, if you think that we discuss the problems of the various countries here, then we may provide the solutions also. If you
Thank
agree, then I would like to say that in our university also, the students are taught that if you have anything extras, like we are using so many things, and if you are having something extra which we are not using for a longer time, then we contribute that to the person who is not having that thing, you can say. And even for women development, we are providing the funds to the women to bring their own businesses. Like such things are done in the university also. And for the environment precautions, we are also making the use of solar energy in India, because there is a uh, big source of solar power in India.
Mm.
So, then, sir, would like to say that in India there is a problem of unemployment, and there may be a country where they need the manpower for their businesses, for their work, and all. And if we if we go together with each and everyone, then we may solve such issues of our country and of the whole world also.
Okay, thank you, Neeraj. That's a really good point about the importance for us to have global conversations about these issues. You used the word family there, and I do like to think of the higher education sector as a global family. I mean, Philipp made the point earlier in his introduction around the importance now in the kind of global politics that we have. More than ever, we are truth-seeking institutions, we're truth-telling, truth-finding institutions, and the importance, and Ilyas made this point as well, you know, as from a perspective of a science-based institution, how important it is more than ever to assert the particular value. We've talked a lot today about partnerships with other parts of society, but perhaps in conclusion to some of the conversations today, I think that specialist focus that we have, what's our specific contribution which makes us different to a charity or makes us different to a company, makes us different to a government or an NGO, is that we exist for the purpose of research and teaching, principally to discover new knowledge and to go where that knowledge takes us, however difficult that might be, as one function. And the second core function, of course, is to share that knowledge through our teaching. So all of us are here with a third mission hat on, but the way we think about our third mission, perhaps, is through first two missions. I think is really important around producing and sharing knowledge. So it's a really fascinating way to start to bring this to conclusion. We could have had so much more time talking about this. 50 minutes was not enough. I feel really sad about that in some ways, but it shows the importance of these conversations, and we will certainly organize more of these through the USRN Forum. I would like to thank our speakers today, as I'm sure you would, either a virtual or a real clap for Mags, for Ilyas, and Philipp. So for our three speakers today, please put your hands together and say thank you. I'd also like to say a big thanks to colleagues in Hong Kong PU, who are the secretariat for the USRN network, particularly to Miranda and colleagues at Hong Kong PU for organising today, because a lot goes into organising these sessions. We've had people from many different continents around the world, and we had around 70 people at one point in the discussion today, which is fantastic. So thank you everyone for giving up your time and being part of these really important global conversations. So do look out for a recording of today's event, and we will certainly arrange to share the slides with you. And if you'd like to follow up anything from any of the participants, and Miranda can arrange for people's email addresses of any of the speakers today, if you would like to follow things up. So let's do that. Let's try and think, what's the one thing we might do different, all of us, as a result of listening to one of the presentations today. I've got 3 things on my notes. I don't have time to share what they are, but I'm going to do 3 things as a result of today as soon as I hang up. And what's the one thing you could all do differently in your context? And these conversations are really important. I think sharing our knowledge and our approaches as a sector is more important than ever as I think was highlighted really eloquently earlier by Philipp in his introduction. So thank you everyone for your time today. Enjoy the rest of your Mondays, whether it's the afternoon, the evening or the morning. Enjoy the rest of your Monday, and we look forward to seeing you again in more sessions online and perhaps even in person in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Julian.